Ready to go? I'd like to call this meeting of the Finance Committee to order and ask that we begin the meeting by pledging allegiance to the flag. I'd ask is there anybody that's recording tonight's meeting? Please let us know. All right, hearing none. Start the meeting with approval of minutes. We have two sets of minutes. The first is a regular meeting on January 11th, 2022. And then the second, we'll take them individually, as the minutes of the tri-board meeting held on January 11th, 2022.
I move the minutes of January 11th, 2022, the regular minutes of January 11th.
Second.
Motion made and seconded. Any discussion around the minutes? Hearing none, we'll take a vote. Mr. Guerrero?
Aye.
Mr. Quartz?
Aye.
Dr. Ward?
Aye.
Mr. Delay?
Aye.
And Mr. O'Keefe?
I will abstain since I was absent.
Yes. Okay, and the chair votes aye. We record that as a 5 positive votes, no negatives, and 1 abstention. The second one is for the tri-board meeting.
I will approve the minutes of the tri-board meeting of January 11th with 2 corrections. On page 5, number 22, they listed a comment by Ward, but it doesn't say whether it's M Ward or R Ward. Should be M. Everywhere else, they put the correct initial in.
Right, 2 wards at that meeting.
Too many wards.
Right.
Second.
The motion made and seconded with the correction on page 5. Any discussion or questions? Hearing none. Mr. Guerrero?
Aye.
Mr. Court?
Aye.
Dr. Ward?
Aye.
Mr. Delay?
Aye.
Mr. O'Keefe?
Abstain.
And the chair votes aye. Record that as 5 to 0 to 1. All right, I think we'll take some of the items out of the order that they are in the agenda. I'd like to put the year-to-date report review after the capital planning and the APRA expenditure discussions.
You need a motion to do that, or can we just do it?
I think we could just do it.
I think so.
So that brings us to the capital planning committee recommendations. And Mr. So,
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And we're joined here this evening by Mike Barbaro, who's the chair of the Capital Planning Committee. So we just wanted to take this opportunity to thank you for sitting down with us to review this plan. This has been a comprehensive process. As you know, when I came to town, one of the items that I had dedicated my efforts to was to pull apart the existing capital plan process and put it back together again in a way that may be a little more useful for us moving forward over the next decade or so. Before you have a 5-year capital plan that gives you a little bit of a broader picture. And if anybody would like to go into depth on that, we certainly can. There are some heavy hitters coming down the road that we wanted to make sure we made note of, among them additional phases for the senior center, the old Murdoch, the potential new fire station. You can see coming up in fiscal year 24 for design fees and 25 for construction, as well as repairs that were more recently identified for the exterior envelope of the town hall structure, $4.5 million phased in over 5 years. I also took the opportunity to try to address a problem that I've been running into since I got to town, which was that numbers were hung on certain projects, but the number didn't necessarily reflect cost escalation in terms of materials and labor. And so I did build in roughly 4% year over year for every phase that we push out, just to try to demonstrate to the community the cost that's incurred by putting some of these items off. Excuse me. Most importantly, the fiscal year 23 capital improvement plan, which are numbers that aren't soft estimates, kind of like you'd see in the 5-year plan, but more so reflective of actual hard quotes. Some of them are on the state bid list. Some of them are quotes that we got from different architects or engineers, so every single one of these numbers holds up firmly, and it's what that number actually would be for the upcoming fiscal year. The 17 items on this list were reviewed at length, and I also provided the funding table on the bottom to show how each of those items are broken out and would ultimately be paid for pending town meeting approval. So with that, I'd like to hand it over to the chair of the Capital Planning Committee, Mr. Barbaro.
Thank you. In front of you, you have the 2023 capital plan. It is probably the most ambitious plan that we've put forward in all the years that we've had the capital plan. The town manager has done a fantastic job of finding financing for most of this, keeping in step with what we always want is transparency in how we get from A to B. One of the things that you'll see through this plan is the use of ARPA funds for for the wastewater and the water plant, which is applicable use of those funds. And so what we've come up with, we usually have a cap of about $350,000 in borrowing. We will not hit that cap this year through the way that we have funded. He has chosen to fund it. The total for the commitment is $231,844 over a 5-year period to be broken up in payments, which you will see on every line item that we are leasing over the next 5 years. Also make a note that the big fire tower truck is coming off the books this year. That was voted on at town meeting as a debt exclusion, so that is now coming off the books this year, so that will drop off as far as our tax rate goes. All these things that are being presented to you this evening will not increase our tax rate one bit. It was voted on unanimously by the Capital Plan Committee, and if you like, I'll go through the items with you.
Just a quick question. What truck is being paid up?
Big tower truck, the fire department tower truck.
Okay. Wasn't that a debt exclusion?
Yes, it was.
So it doesn't free up money.
No, it doesn't free up money for any of this, but what it does is it does that payment that we
Payments
have
done,
been
right.
paying does come off the books. I just wanted to make that clear for the general public
Yeah.
that that's actually coming off this year as we try to rotate other things, but I think that was a big one that was voted on 10 years ago.
Yeah.
You know, that was over an $800,000 expense that is now being paid off. I think that's great for this community. It helps our credit, but also let the taxpayer know that this is something that's coming off the books that, not a lot of money, but a little money off the tax bill, some relief in this time. So I just wanted to make that clear. But if you're ready, sir, I will present the items to you.
Yep.
Okay, so we are looking at doing the DPW roof, which is coming up at roughly $300,000, and each 5-year payment is $63,000. The next thing on there is a front-end loader that is being paid for through the efforts of Mr. Croto through ARPA funds and a grant, which he was able to get for $44,395 from the state, which, again, helps us tremendously. The wheeled excavator, we're getting through the ARPA funds again. This goes to the work of the Water and Sewer Department, and we're getting $20,000 on a trade-in. The salt shed, which was on there, has been removed. We moved it to another year. There's another way to fund that. We're looking for a different source of revenue for that. The trailer vector, which is $98,834, is again going through the ARPA funds. What that is that'll help clean out the sewer lines throughout town, so that'll go through the wastewater plant. Transfer station vehicle is going to be paid for through the enterprise.
Back up, the trail vector is a what?
It helps flush out the sewer lines.
So is it a piece of equipment?
It's
Is
a
it
piece of
hose?
equipment,
Is it-
it's a piece of equipment that they can
Okay.
go into the sewer lines with and help flush them out and get them a little bit
Uses
cleaner.
water?
It would be under the wastewater, but
it
through the
uses
ARPA
water
fund.
to flush it out, or does it flush it out with air, or,
I'm not sure, Miss.
Brian?
It sucks it out, so it cleans it out of the trough. So if you have debris built up on the shelves or debris in the trough after you use the water jetter, it cleans it without having to put personnel inside the hole.
So it's like
So
a vacuum.
Yes, ma'am, it is a Vector. We can't afford a Vector at 400,000, so this is the other alternative.
Thank you.
Yep.
And the transfer station vehicle is going to be paid for through the transfer funds. That fund is self-sufficient and has enough funding to pay for it. If you look at that price on that, as we go through it, it's $54,697. Then we have the excavator and trailer, total price of $170,492, and that's to be paid for over a 5-year period for $32,000.25 through a lease payment. One of the things that the town manager wanted to put in this budget was a supplemental for road paving. As you know, our roads in town do not get a lot of attention other than Chapter 90 funds. He's supplemented $129,000 in that out of free cash to do some catch-up on some other roads in town for the long term. Next up, we have the fire department has requested the SCBA replacement. Those are the air tanks that the fire department uses. They are coming to the end of their lifespan, and they need to be replaced over the next few years.
How many?
I believe 25.
Mr. Chair, can I ask, what is the lifespan of those?
They range between 10 to 13 years. We're at the 10-year mark now, and rather than doing it all at once, we're able to get all of them at once rather than spreading them out, so they're all the same model and all the same tools.
Thank you.
So you'll see the first year is 26,000, and then the next year is 52,265, and that carries through to the rest of the program. Next up is the pumper replacement. As you know, our last fire truck that is of age is a 98, and the fire chief was able to secure through the DEP, Department of Environmental Protection, $175,000 worth of funding, which we don't know how he did it, but he did it. So we are thankful for that. That will bring all of our equipment into the modern era and give us a good 10 to 15-year lifespan. And again, if you look at that payment plan, that is $110,819 on a lease moving forward.
So is the pumper truck not working now?
No, it's at the end of its lifespan.
Well, I've heard that before, but if we're looking at end of lifespan, I mean, the old ladder truck 10 years ago was still being used in Mass, so it was at the end of its lifespan, but 10 years later, it's still a viable truck. And if we're looking at major renovations and building on the fire station, all these little things add up.
I agree with you, but the truck is at the end of its lifespan. It's very hard to get parts to repair it. Currently, the pump is leaking, and to be putting more money into that vehicle over time, you're throwing good money after bad because you can't replace the parts as you move forward. The thing is that will be the last piece of equipment, major piece of equipment other than a fire station that we need. Our ambulances are on a rotating basis, but again, that truck was a 98, and that's the last of the old trucks in town that does have mechanical problems from time to time. With these new trucks, they will be maintained because they're obviously under warranty for most of this stuff. So we have a chance to save some money on maintenance, but also stretch out the life of the vehicles going forward for the next 10 to 15 years. After that, you'll see a purchase of 70 Pleasant Street. There was an opportunity for the library to buy a piece of property, the old Fletcher Funeral Home, for a price of, I gotta find it here, $184,000. And they would like to turn that into a children's library long-term, a children's library and teen library. When they looked at the cost of retrofitting that building versus retrofitting the basement, it does come in roughly about $500,000 cheaper. And obviously, the space gain that they would gain from that is significant. So we are in negotiations with a Realtor to look at how we may get that property under contract with the consent of town meeting, to have it written in there that the funding would be provided through town meeting. Also, with the town manager, in looking through all the projects, has found that the elevator project that was put through the library a few years ago has a remaining balance of $70,000. We would like to repurpose that money at town meeting for this project, then again, bringing that cost down.
Was there any discussion to make it more than just a children's library, but a dual-use building, so that, like, I'm thinking of town elections, no stairs for the seniors, no elevators, they could walk in and out for handicapped accessible, to do things like that there.
I apologize, I'm not sure I quite understand your question.
Rather than just a children's library, could it be used for other things?
Completely independent of being a children's library?
Yeah.
Nobody has come forward with a need for that space. So I'm not quite sure I'm understanding your question.
Well, I'm just thinking, we have all our elections at the senior center. It's very difficult for handicapped folks to come in, go upstairs, because they have to go through the basement. They go upstairs to the second floor. 2 restrooms are on the first floor, only 1 on the second floor. It becomes a real problem, and like you weren't here. 2 elections ago, our elevator went kaput right in the middle of the day.
Oof.
So we had to move things downstairs for those folks that couldn't do stairs. And we had to sit in the parking lot with our ballots and try and keep them secure while folks were coming in and out. If this building, it's 1 level, it would be kind of nice to have things like that there for our citizens.
So you're saying in addition, as a children's library, to use it for,
Yeah, I
with
just
the
asked-
understanding that there'd be other community uses?
Yeah.
So yes, there has been discussion of when and if they go through a restoration process, to have a community-type room to potentially be able to use it for additional meeting space. There are plenty of nights when we're jockeying for
Right.
position and trying to not get stuck up on the 4th floor.
Yeah.
So that has been part of the discussion, and I'm sure where there's a handicap ramp on the north side of the building, that it may be a good use for elections as well.
Yeah, because then it's easier to transport those ballots back here to the safe as well.
Mhm.
I
So-
just
so it
wondered
will-
if that discussion had taken place.
Yeah, it will be, the intention is for it to be a community space. It will primarily be a children/teen library, with the understanding that there'll be a more multifaceted community use.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
So next up is, you'll see a radio project match, that is for the police department. We're looking to fund 150, the total cost of that is $504,831. The proposed from our funding of it is $154,649 from free cash. The $230,000 is being asked for through Robinson Broadhurst, and $120,182 funded through DPW Fire and annual operating budget. This is our radio systems that all of the departments use. They are well past their lifespan. As you know, technology moves forward. These radios are at least 10 years old and need to be phased out. Again, we are looking at creative ways to fund things. The town manager has looked at this hard to try to bring us back into compliance with some new, obviously, technology that will buy us time down the road. Are we all set with that? The next up is a live fingerprint scan for $16,875, which will be funded through free cash. Again, we have a fingerprint scanner. We have 2 of them. One of them is very, very old and needs to be replaced, and so we would have 1 unit that we use now. The other one is aging out, and if it breaks, then we only have 1, and if that breaks, then we have no way to fingerprint anyone and put them in the database. This allows us to have a backup system for the police department.
Can't buy those ink pads anymore, Chief?
Those days are long gone. Next up is our police cruiser replacement. As you know, annually, we replace cruisers. We do it through a 911 grant, which we've been doing for many, many years. It was brought into the open by the former town manager, so it can be seen. Generally speaking, our cruises get up to about 100,000 miles in a 3-year period due to the road conditions. And then we start to run into all sorts of repair work that goes through them. At 100,000 miles, it is a good time to trade them in and upgrade the units. We have been doing that for a couple of years. We backed off it last year. Regular cruises, we bought a unmarked cruiser. So that will bring that back in line, and you'll see that that carries on through the next few years. But again, that is paid for through the 911 Enhanced Grant. So again, that money is something we're taking in because we use the, our 911 system is used regionally.
Is there any trade-in value with that, on that cruiser? Trade-in value?
Trade-in value?
Oh, okay.
About $5,000 a cruiser, the chief is just saying, that we get in a trade-in. Next up is through the planning department, obviously with a lot of grants coming down the road. We started to fund a project design grant fund. As we apply for grants, we have to have stuff in place, designs in place to apply for grants. We've been very fortunate in the last few years to get a lot of grants. Central Street will be started this year. We use that money also for CBDG grants and community green grants. As you see, we're getting a lot of bang for our buck. You'll see new sidewalks being put in different areas of town, up around Maple Street. All these grants need to be, all these applications need to have pre-planning ahead so we can apply for the grants. And as you know, the federal government is stalling on some big money grants, but hopefully Brian has been put together a lot of projects, so when the money does come available, we can jump in line and hopefully secure some more grants for this community that will take the burden off the average taxpayer.
Mr. Chairman?
Could you be more specific on exactly what the money is used for? Because I don't understand.
Sure. So this was something that was in place at last year's annual town meeting back on May 17th, and the question had come up. So for a lot of infrastructure grants in particular, you hear a lot of people, folks around town say, well, go out and get a grant. Many of these grants, you can't just say, hey, we have this idea, will you fund it? Particularly through the state and feds. They want to see up to a certain percentage of some type of shovel-ready project. So you need to have money up front to fund those designs, sometimes as much as 75% design complete before you can even apply for these grants. And so the $40,000 that went through at last year's annual town meeting was applied for surveying and preliminary design for Beach Street running from spring to summer. And that design will be used to apply for a CDBG grant that would cover all of the infrastructure costs, as well as some of the subsurface costs. So it's essentially seed corn. You need to kind of put it up front. You need to spend money to make these grant funds materialize, and that's the intent of this. So where it was in place last year, we wanted to keep the ball rolling and continue doing that so we can keep these things moving forward.
So it's like land survey, a wetland survey, those kind of things?
Yep, and the actual physical layout as well. So most recently, Blair Square is probably a good example. That's a very preliminary plan. It's not quite where it needs to be for us to get it on the tip yet, but we're in the process of doing it. But you'll actually be able to see a physical designed layout.
Okay,
But those grants will typically only cover construction costs. They won't cover design fees.
thank you.
Mr. O'Keefe?
I'm not against the capital item. My question, though, would be, is ARPA appropriate here? Because ARPA is very limited what we can use the money for. If this was grant design for, water and sewer systems, ARPA would cover. But I'm assuming you've already verified that?
It's an excellent question.
ARPA here?
Yeah, so ARPA is very restricted in how you can use it. However, there was an opportunity presented by our auditors that if you can prove lost revenue in the prior fiscal year, due to the COVID-19 pandemic, that whatever that figure of lost revenue comes out to, it essentially frees up that, it mirrors it in the amount of what you can use for ARPA. So it really takes some of the shackles off. With that said, we're still primarily using it for water and sewer infrastructure because that's a tremendous need that we have in town. But there is a little bit more flexibility there than typical.
Thanks for that clarification.
Yeah, and I do know it's an item that the Capital Planning Committee has been trying to move forward for several years. It usually would end up in a cutting floor. Last year, even though we did have to make some cuts, we kept it in the budget, because I think that the purpose for it was understood, that it's very difficult for us to move forward and attract grants if we don't have some source of money to invest when the opportunity strikes.
And last but not least on the plan is Toy Town's chairlift. That is no longer functioning and no longer able to get parts for it. It is 20-plus years old. It is no longer operable. And the last time they were looking to get parts, they had to be manufactured for that lift. That is a total cost of $70,000 out of free cash. So what you're seeing for the year is a total of $1,552,356 to be spent on capital items through all different funding mechanisms. All the mechanisms that are there for funding are there so you could see them and the general public can see them. This was passed by the capital plan as a package, and when presented at town meeting, it will be like any other budgetary department where we'll go line by line and people can put a hold on it for questions moving forward. That way, it allows the public to ask questions on each individual item, other than having 17 additional warrant items on the agenda for that evening. I think we'll be happy to move through that quicker than each individual line item. Although I will tell you that, you know, in all the years that we've had capital plan, this is the most ambitious plan we had. The conversation's now moving forward in different areas. We are planning to start again in June and have asked the town manager to look at a borrowing bond for $1 million for road repairs in the distant future and spread that out over 2 years so we can try to catch up on some of our major paving projects. It also gives us the town ability in the future when we go out to bid between the Chapter 90 funds and what we would be supplementing over a 2-year period of about $1 million a year to get a better price from a contractor, make it more attractive to maybe get a major contractor and allow this community to catch up on a lot of roads. So, you know, Tom, we've been talking about this for a couple of years, but it came up the other night, and I think, you know, it's one of those things that we want to take a serious look at, and the town manager is looking at how much it would cost over a period to borrow $500,000 one year, $500,000 the next year, and spread that out over a 10-year period. I think that will help the community long-term. But again, I think everything you see here presented this evening is needed equipment, and it will give us a great, especially using ARPA funds, allows us a great opportunity to catch up on equipment that we've desperately needed over the years, and it doesn't burden the taxpayer with the debt, which again is part and parcel of some of these funding mechanisms. So I thank you for your opportunity.
Mr. Chair.
Any questions?
Yeah, I'm wondering if there's been any discussion about how the Robinson Broadhurst Foundation fits into our capital needs and the process that we use to identify needs and prioritize them and identify funding sources.
So most departments have to make their requests to Robinson Broadhurst prior to, mostly before December. So they have to have that in. So a lot of that information the town manager has ahead of time coming into the meetings as he looks forward for some of the funding. He has had, as he will tell you, conversations with Robinson Broadhurst. So we generally have a good idea of where they'd like to go year to year. But as far as, we have to wait for their vote, and we were very fortunate last year. As you remember, we found out pretty much on town floor, the funding mechanisms that they provided us last year for the senior center and the library. We don't control how they spend their money. We ask nicely. They have been very generous to this community for as long as I've been here, and I'm sure it goes back even farther than that. Very rarely do we get turned down for anything we ask for. And, you know, one of their major things that they have done was the community park. They wanted to make a mark. They wanted to leave something long-lasting, and that is well underway now. So I think, you know, when you think of Robinson Broadhurst, they help this community, and we always thank them. And the town manager has very many meetings with them, and sometimes we ask them to redirect some of the money that we haven't spent.
Yeah, I believe me, I understand the value that Robinson Broadhurst has for this town. Really, I was thinking more in terms of coordinating. You know, one of the things that happened last year was the radios, and there was a request of Robinson Broadhurst to fund the purchase of the new radios. They identified that they would pay for half of the radios over a 2-year period. So we were stuck without any warrant article that would identify the total cost of the radios. And it had me thinking, you know, you pointed out last year, we had a number of capital articles that we were hoping we'd get some funding from Robinson Broadhurst. So they were structured, the articles were structured so that you identified the cost of the project. And then we said, if we get some or all of the money that we've asked for, it'll reduce this project by X amount of money. And people voted on that. But it didn't work that way with the radios, because we didn't have a warrant article on there for the radios. So when we couldn't get all the money, you know, it was a scramble to how do we come up with the money. You know, a major purchase like that, $500,000, it seems to me that if it's part of the discussion with the capital planning committee, then the strategy used to secure the money, you know, might be more coordinated than it was for this one.
Well, I agree with you. I think what you're seeing with Robinson Broadhurst, and the conversation has come up before, is they don't mind funding a lot of the projects, but they'd like to see us put our own money up too. And I think when we go to them and say, listen, you know, in this, and I'm going to use the radio as a perfect example, in this radio project, Max, is $500,000. Well, we're asking them for $230, and then we're coming up with the rest. That's typically what they would like to see, that we will do some funding. So when the town manager would go to them from the department heads, I'm sure that conversation is with Robinson Broadhurst saying, I would like to bring this particular item up, you know, let's talk about the radios, and I'm looking for ways to fund it through our capital plan also. You know, that is a discussion between the town manager and Robinson Broadhurst after the department heads turn their requests in.
Well, it's a discussion that the capital planning committee could have as to how are we going to fund this need. We got a need for the radios. Would like to get, you know, there's a good chance that Robinson Broadhurst would provide some funding, maybe all the funding. My understanding is that was the original request, that we asked for all the funding from Robinson Broadhurst, and they came back and said, well, here's half of it. We'll give you some of this year, some of this next year. So it's just a suggestion. You know, it just made me think that, you know, we do benefit dramatically from Robinson Broadhurst, yet we have a lot of needs. So, you know, if we look at all of the needs, the capital planning committee looks at all of the needs and identifies, well, these are the types of things that we could ask Robinson Broadhurst. And you're still going to the town and asking the town for permission to purchase.
Well, if you look at this, which is, you know, this is the first real year we've taken the town manager, as he's come to town, has gone through pretty much every building I've seen him in the paper pulling bricks out of this building for repairs, and really gathering a full list. You know, when you look at the projection for the total 5 years of up to 2027, it's $25 million. Well, it gives us an idea of how we get to start looking at these more in line. What we've always wanted to do is have a better idea of where our needs are and how do we secure them. Having some figures to work with, a clear and comprehensive plan allows us to start looking at more opportunities through grants to fund these projects moving forward, especially, you know, some of the big ticket items. I think that, you know, when you look at that overall, you know, we're very fortunate that we have at least a game plan moving forward for the next 5 years, barring any, you know, unforeseen circumstances that pop up, and they do happen time to time. But I think when you look at it, you know, we have, how do we get from A to B? Well, now you start looking at it and breaking down some of these costs, and then, you know, ultimately, it's always up to the voters of this community what they want to fund. Any big projects like, you know, an $8 million fire station or $4 million in additional funding for senior center will have to go out for debt exclusion. But again, that would have to be a conversation we have throughout the whole community and educate people of the needs. And I think looking at a full and comprehensive plan like this, it gives us the opportunity to start the conversation with you, with the Board of Selectmen, and with the general public. And the chief has been talking about his fire station, getting the fire station built, and has plans to educate the public about that. I think that opens the door for us to have more communication with the community about what we're building or what we want to build and how do we get there. I think that is very, very important moving forward.
I agree.
Question? You said this was going to go on as a whole on the warrant. ARPA 911 grant, TS Enterprise, those aren't voted on at town hall, are they? Or town meeting?
They don't have to be, but we would like to put them on there anyway because it's a capital purchase. And so while we're paying for, you know, the equipment, for example, the taxpayer is still picking up the potential future cost of maintaining that equipment. And so I think there's value in providing the public an opportunity to vote for that purpose.
I think it confuses things when you put it as a whole. If you put all the ARPA issues on one warrant, all the free cash on one warrant, maybe all the grants, something so they could see the split.
I think that's something we can do.
You know, just to keep it clean, because when you do it this way, folks take a while to wrap their head around it, and rather than just doing a blanket yes, they'll vote no until they understand it.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Mike.
Oh, you're welcome. Is there any other questions?
Any other questions from committee members?
And Mr. Chair, I just would want to add on that list, the town hall cupola got skipped at $35,000 out of free cash.
Sorry, I
It
missed
reduced by 4K, so does that mean you're gonna go up with a little rope tied to, and you're gonna?
I'm gonna do a little side work, some moonlighting.
that. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Thank you, Mike. All right. So that brings us into the APA report, and I'll turn it over to, again, to Mr. Silsback.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And just for, I guess, a functional question, does the Finance Committee typically vote recommendations on the capital plan in advance of it appearing to the Board of Selectmen?
No.
No.
Okay. And then moving on to the ARPA plan. Thank you. So as you know, periodically, we like to bring this before the Board of Selectmen for an opportunity for public review. It's important for us for this to be a transparent process, but it did come up recently at the Tri-Board that the Finance Committee would like for me to pay them a visit once in a while and provide some updates as well, which I'm, as always, more than happy to do. We have Brian Croto up on the screen with us who can speak to some of these projects if need be, but one of the most important takeaways that I wanted to get through for this particular meeting was the 4 items on the capital plan and what impact they would have in terms of the total remaining budget. So there's one last deposit rolling through for ARPA. A specific date hasn't been set. The state so far has just said, quote, this summer. So I put just the start of the fiscal year as an assumption, but we wouldn't purchase that equipment until that deposit actually came through. After those 4 items on the capital improvement plan, it would reduce the total amount of ARPA funding remaining down to $1,139,739 and change. And I just wanted to make the committee aware of that as we continue to draw down those funds. We're also being mindful that there are other funds coming down from the federal government that still need to get filtered through the state. But there's been no indication from Beacon Hill on when they intend to disperse those funds and in what form they intend to disperse them. So it could be exclusively grants. There could be some type of payment based on a formula to different communities, which I'm doubtful of, but is certainly a possibility as well.
Is this beyond the infrastructure plan, or is it part of?
This is the infrastructure plan I'm referencing.
Okay.
So ARPA went through, and then there's additional infrastructure money coming down the road. But they haven't determined how they're going to pay that out yet.
Yeah. I know they talked a bit about that at the MMA meeting, and again, just to tie in with the discussion we had before about the $40,000 for planning purposes, that the towns that have shovel-ready projects are going to be in an advantageous situation.
And we want to have as many shovel-ready projects in hand as possible for when that funding does hit. We want to be first in line.
So one of the questions I've got is, I mean, some of the projects that we've got here, bridge repair, Central Street, what have you, are they projects that we might be able to get some additional funding for through the infrastructure grants?
There could be some potential reshuffling of some of these, depending whether or not we've made payments, but there could be, effectively a reclass. We'd have to see if there are any financial strings attached to that, if they'd permit us to do that. If it was work that we had done, for example, before those funds were released, then they may not allow us to flip that money around. But if there's an opportunity for us to seek out financial flexibility in that capacity in doing that, I think that's something that's worth reviewing.
I mean, that's what I was wondering about. I mean, obviously, they're not going to fund a project that we've completed retroactively. But if we were to slow down a little bit on some of these projects until we understand what the detail is for the available federal money, where they're putting money into bridges, they're putting money into roads. And there might be an opportunity to take advantage of that we might lose if we move too quickly.
Sure, we're trying to be conscious of our pacing. The Robbins Road Bridge, for example, we can't really wait on because it's open and ongoing. But on other items, we are trying to pace ourselves accordingly because there are a lot of unknowns, more so than typical in terms of how this funding is going to roll out. And so it's always been a concern that we don't want to needlessly spend money for one thing when there's other funds coming down that could potentially cover that expense, especially where some of these ARPA funds have been freed up a little bit and some of the new funding may not be as freed up because of that loss of revenue that we've proved. So that's something that we'll certainly keep in the back of our mind.
Any questions on any of the ARPA funding projects?
Thank you, I appreciate this.
You're welcome. Always a pleasure to visit.
So we'll move on to year-to-date reports. Joanna identified several changes and the rationales for them or the anticipated actions for them. A couple of the accounts that were overdrawn and how she was going to cover those. Particularly, there's some smaller items, the COA outreach, library, holiday sick time, that type of thing.
I had a concern on the school page, excuse me, page 35. Employee vacation buyback, negative 21,000.
What page was it?
35.
35? Yeah, they're definitely, the sick leave buyback and vacation buyback. I know that they had a significant turnover in administrative positions. So I'm presuming that what they had budgeted for those, knowing that there were some,
That's,
but obviously the number of administrators that resigned or retired.
that's huge. I listened to the school committee last week, and the superintendent has taken to take it upon himself to do the year-to-date with the school committee. And he goes through each of these things, but he missed this one. And I don't know if he just didn't see it or he didn't have an answer for it, but that was a big chunk of change.
Yeah. And it's going to be incumbent upon them to balance that off,
Yeah.
of course.
He did say that there were many things, like we talked about the secretary at one of the schools was a negative account. It had been posted to the wrong thing, and it hadn't been cleared up, and it's almost like a lot of things have to be reclassed and moved over, but they haven't been done yet, and we're going on 4 or 5 months now. He's waiting for those things.
Well, certainly one of the issues is that they still do not have a business manager.
Yeah.
You know, so they're
Yeah.
covering this. I've had some conversation, with Mr. King. Phil and I have met a couple of times with him to review the couple of questions that we've had. And some of the things that are certainly unusual, but very relevant, are the number of positions that aren't filled. And as he explained to me, they just cannot get the professional staff that they need, speech therapists, occupational therapists. So there are a number of, and including in that, it would be a business manager, positions that they find it very difficult to those are key positions.
He said he was going to
You got to
post
provide
for,
those services to kids. You don't have an option. So I got a feeling that the contracted services
yeah.
line item is probably pretty high too.
He said he was posting for a business manager, hopefully by the end of February. He figured this was the active time to be doing that in.
What?
He's posting for a business manager by the end of this February, hoping that during this active time when people are looking for changes, he may get someone.
It may actually already be posted.
Oh, good.
Yep. Mr. Chair, if you don't mind, I'm going to excuse myself for the evening unless there's anything that you think you may need.
Yes.
Good? Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Justin. Yeah, there are a number of single line items that are overspent, but again, it's a bottom line budget for the school
Yeah.
department. And I think that from my conversations with Mr. King, I'd say that he's very much on top of the reports and on top of the accounts that are currently in the red.
His
Mr.
bottom
Chairman.
line budget is very good,
Okay.
56%.
When I look at the school budget, one thing I find amazing, we have 39 pages, and you got all the way to page 39, very bottom line. Through the end of January, they have only spent or encumbered 56% of their budget.
Yep,
Yep,
School departments are very much having to encumber many of their expenses at the beginning of the year. I would expect at the end of January to see them much closer to 70%, not below 7/12.
what they
So
don't do is they don't encumber the salaries, which is, when I've worked with school budgets on a district-wide level, we would encumber the salaries, assuming we're gonna spend those salaries during the course of the year. So you're really operating with a, when you're looking at the balance of your budget, it's really where there's discretion in terms of spending, which is a much smaller percentage, you're right.
True. While they don't encumber the whole year's salary, this report does show the 7/12's salary already, though.
Yeah.
Because what?
It shows the 7 months of the year's salary.
Yeah.
So it isn't
But
underreported.
it's not 7 months, it's not 7 months for the teachers. For the teachers, it's about 5.5 months.
Correct, because teachers in June
Right.
get July and
Right.
August.
And typically, the most teachers' salaries are paid out on a 12-month basis, and then they get their balloon check at the end of June.
And is that how they've done it at Winchendon Schools for many years? Not encumber?
Yeah,
Now,
so,
if that's
so
true-
some of the money that hasn't been expended is that balloon checks, what's earned. In other words, if you think that they work a 10-month year, and you broke it into 10 months of payments, you get a certain amount of money, but they don't. At one time, they used to have an option. You could either have a 10-month payment or a 12-month payment, but I think those days have gone by as strictly a 12-month payment.
So because of that, what I would find most interesting and valuable to us is, while this info is valuable, but I'd like to know what was the percent January of last year, the year before, back several years.
Yeah,
Then it becomes real meaningful.
yeah.
Is 56% for the first 7 months above or below their norm? It looks very good, but you've already pointed out a couple reasons it may not be. But by being able to compare it to the last several years, we would have a lot more info there.
Yeah.
it's
I'm
about
not
the
sure
same.
if that
It's
would be,
It's about the same. Yeah, they haven't encumbered or used that column for a long time. And I think possibly, Tom, because you could say, when the last full-time business administrator left before they brought in contracted services, was it encumbered at that time? Because I know when they brought in the first contracted service company, they were a little shy on what they were supposed to do with school budgets. I don't think they really understood them. And then every year, it just seemed to get less and less.
could we inquire with Joanne what it would take to actually be able to see that each month going forward? I don't want to make her do a tremendous amount of work, or anybody in the office, but if it's a button that they can push in Munis to add another column so that we could see what it looked like in prior years at the
Say
same
prior
timeframe.
2 years or 3 years.
Yes.
Should be able to do that in Munis.
Or we could, if somebody still has all their copies from the last few years, I bet you do.
I don't keep them all.
Yeah.
Usually what I do is I keep the last one of the year.
And it's really
May not
the,
help you out wouldn't have a collection of Januaries, I'd have a collection of Julys, the end of June, the beginning of July, when we close out the budget.
and looking back a few years, I wouldn't even want to see all 39 pages, just the last
last page.
page
Yeah.
for each of these subsections that
Yeah.
are broken out.
I'll talk to Joanne and see what it would take to get that. It'd be interesting.
If not, we'll ask whoever still has these, can you photocopy the last page for us each month?
Yeah, the other thing that complicates this particular budget this year too is that last year they had a lot of CARES money, and so they ended up encumbering about, I want to say $400,000, $500,000 that then get carried over and added into this year. And I took a look at that for a while, trying to figure out how it skews the overall percentage, because you've got this additional money that's encumbered, so it's going to inflate the overall spending percentage to some extent. At least it will early on in the year. Trying to keep track of the various year-to-date reports has its challenges. But I do find them interesting. You know, for instance, one of the things I learned this year was the whole encumbrance and how that works at the end of the year, carrying into the next year. And now obviously it's something specific, it's not a number. There's a specific purchase. If you've encumbering money, there's a paper trail as to what it's for. It does end up, as I said, skewing your percentages a little bit. I think even I was talking to Joanne the other day about the enterprise funds. And I said, gee, the enterprise funds look pretty good. They're 61, 62, 63%. But you got to remember that all the money that we voted in to add to the budget at the beginning of the year, that's not being checked in on an accrual basis. That all came in at one time. So it's an artificial increase the revenue. You know, so the revenue picture might not look quite as rosy, the actual revenue, as it looks in the bottom line.
Yeah, I myself am not a fan when you encumber the whole year's expense up front, because throughout the years, all of us and other people are going through these reports. They become less meaningful if the funds are fully encumbered for the year. What we want to know is what the actual expenses are,
Right.
not just what's encumbered.
Right.
Because encumbered tends not to be adjusted until the very end of the fiscal year, that they start, removing an encumbrance if money was left over. It would be nice to know money was, not being spent to the same level that it was assumed that it was needed, that it was budgeted.
That's right. I mean, a lot of times, for instance, transportation, sped transportation, there's a lot of money encumbered in sped transportation. At this point in the year, it looks like we're not going to need that much money, so it's likely to add to some free cash at the end of the year. One of the things that I've been paying attention to, as I said, there was a lot of money encumbered and added to the budget at the beginning of the year. So I've been looking to see if that money's been spent, because I realized there's a lot of supply chain issues that they've had to buy certain pieces of equipment, and it's understandable that they couldn't purchase it before the end of the fiscal year. And I would say that it appears that most of it now has been spent. So the encumbered amounts have diminished quite a bit and have gone into payments, expended money. Anything specific, anything else?
The other thing that we used to get from the school quarterly was a grants reconciliation spreadsheet. And we haven't had that for almost a year now.
Yeah.
And I noticed the other night, Superintendent King said that there were some grants that were not closed out properly at the end of FY21. They were trying to reconcile that, and I would like to not see another 5-page spreadsheet. So if he could give us that, maybe we could take a look and see where we're at.
Okay. Yeah, I'll be meeting with Mr. King sometime in the next week or two.
Okay.
So Bob, if I'm going to ask Joanne for some copies of the January reports, you want to go back a few years, just keep it to 1 month?
Just the last
gut
page.
check, quarterly?
Quarterly would be sufficient.
Okay, let's see what she can do.
If I still have that at home, I'll email you tonight, okay?
Okay.
Yeah, I'm sure that somebody may have it in a binder. There's no need to necessarily reprint all these reports.
Yeah, yeah.
The question is, who keeps that binder?
Yeah, I'm not even sure,
I figured Mo would.
yeah, I mean, I'm not even sure how many years they keep these monthly year-to-date reports.
I cleaned out 5 years' worth this past summer, and I'm not sure if I kept 1 or 2 years, just so I could
Okay.
compare.
Yeah, I've been keeping them, like I said, the end of the year report, basically.
Tom, were you planning on going through these at all, or would you like any questions on any of them to just be brought up?
Did you what?
Are we going to go through
Come up.
each of these? Just bring up anyone, all right.
Yep.
On the packet for the general fund,
Yep.
the account 0001. So that's the report, that's 7 pages. So it's what one of the smallest ones we have here.
We're looking at the town?
Yep.
What page is it?
The very last page, page 7,
Okay,
but I'm not going to the very last line this
same
time.
issue.
Question I have is transfer in from enterprise, is that enterprise F? 307,000.
Fun.
Okay, so which enterprise funds and why are enterprise funds transferring 307,000 in? And we have many enterprise funds.
The transfer to the water and the wastewater were the 2 warrant articles and to cover the shortfall from FY '21.
But since it's a negative number here, this is money transferring into the general fund, not money transferring out of the general fund and into an enterprise fund. This is going in the opposite direction. It's leaving the enterprise funds and coming back to the general fund.
No, because each one of those, there were allocations, I think most of them came out of free cash. They were the warrant articles on the October, November.
I do remember that, but that's
Yeah.
money flowing out of the general, going to the enterprise. This is going in the other direction. It's
All
307,000.
negative.
The 81,000 and the 154,000. Let me get this straight. There were 2 things that we did. We raised the money in May to cover the shortfalls for FY '21.
Mhm.
And then in November, we raised money to narrow the shortfall, the anticipated shortfall for this year, FY '22. Let me, yeah, the 81,562 was a transfer in from the general fund. That was voted on in the May meeting. And then from ARPA, we transferred in 51,664 in the November meeting. That's part of the revenue that's used, if I understand this correctly.
I see that when we look at the
this
water
year.
enterprise.
Right, and the 81,000 went into the overall enterprise fund, but it was covering the shortfall for last year.
Right, but this is 307,000 from enterprise back to the general. That's different. When we look at, for example, 0600 water enterprise, there you see the transfer from general and the transfer from APA. And we'd see the same on sewer. But this is 307,000 coming back into general.
Where's the,
And since it doesn't tell us which enterprise fund, this may not be related to water or sewer, you know.
Transfer station? Could be anything.
you're looking on the last page of the town report, right?
Right. Page 7, transfer in from enterprise, $307,000.
This is from enterprise F. And so when we look at this, unless it's multiple enterprise funds.
I think, I'll have to check with Joanne, but I'm thinking, Bob, that it's the indirect cost for the three enterprise funds. The indirect cost that is assessed to the funds that goes to the general fund.
That's possible, although when I look at water, I don't see the transfer out, if that was the case. I would expect to see a transfer out, looking at water and sewer. And it may be the case, it's been a few years since I've looked through these munis reports in this town with this level of detail. So it may be easiest if you could ask Joanne.
Yeah, see, we've got, if you look at the water department budget on page 2 of that, the bottom, there's a transfer to general fund, $146,063, which is the indirect water contributions, the water enterprise fund indirect costs to the town. So I'm guessing, and I don't know this, that that's a total of the three indirect costs that go to the general fund.
Yep, I see that 146, then we jump to page 4, it's 138. So the two of them are getting very close to the 300.
Yeah.
The remaining must be
A
one of the
smaller
smaller enterprise
amount
funds.
from the,
So, I think you answered it, no need to go to Joanne, thank you.
okay. I had to go and sit down with Joanne to go over it again, because I couldn't remember what the 81,000,
Yeah.
that was the year before. All right, any other questions on year-to-date reports? All right, so the next thing on the agenda is just a calendar for the budget-making process. Let's see if I should lose it, but essentially, we've got the date set for the presentation of the town manager's budget. I believe it's on Monday, the 14th.
Yep.
And it's a joint meeting between us and the Board of Selectmen. And it'd give us our opportunity to ask questions, give them feedback on the budget. And then 2 weeks after that, we'll meet again to hear the final budget. So if he's made any changes based on the first go-around. We need to schedule a meeting with Monty Tech.
Yep.
Could you?
We'll be doing our final budget approval March 2nd.
Okay.
So,
Any, we could look at calendars. Typically, we meet with them sometime in early March.
do you have a preference?
I don't have a preference. It's usually a
you
pretty
wanna-
straightforward meeting.
Do you want to do it on our regular Tuesday night meeting, if I can get them?
Yeah, if you can get them on a Tuesday night meeting, that'd be great. Say the 8th,
That's March the 15th?
8th to the 15th.
Okay, I'll send an email.
8th would be our normal night.
That's right. Do you want it on the 8th?
Sure, if we could do that, yeah.
I'll see if I can get the 8th.
Okay.
If I ask her now, maybe I can be at the top of the list.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. I'll call Mr. King and see if we could set something on one of the school committee Thursday night meetings.
They said that they were probably going to be towards the end of March.
Yeah, which is when we usually
Yeah,
do meet with them. Would they meet the 2nd and 4th?
2nd and 4th, isn't it? They met last week. So what was last Thursday? Just flip your page one.
I've got my 21 calendar retired, so I'm not sure what it is. Well, I'll check with them and find out. But we'll be having, March is always a busy month, because we meet, we've
Yeah.
got three separate budgets to go through. So if we can nail down those dates soon, then we can all plan accordingly. Is there anything we should be staying away from?
They must meet on the 1st and 3rd. So the 3rd would be March 17th. I don't know if they'll be ready to go
I
then.
don't think so. I'd be surprised. I'll talk with
Okay,
Thad and,
That's the only day that I wouldn't be available, the 17th.
17th, St. Patrick's Day.
Yeah.
you been getting your green on?
No, actually. That's another good reason not to have a meeting.
Yeah. And then, right now, we've got the public hearing scheduled for April 26th.
Well, April the 11th, I have a draft warrant presented to Board of Selectmen and Finance Committee. Is that still on?
On the 11th?
April the 11th.
Yeah.
And March the 28th is the final warrant reading, final budget presentation.
After the public hearing, that's right.
March the 28th is the joint meeting with Boss for the
Oh,
final
March.
budget.
On the budget, yeah.
So the next meeting is April 11th with the selectmen for the draft warrant,
Right.
and the 26th for the final warrant and public hearing.
Yeah, it seemed to me they were going to wait until after the public hearing before they finalized the warrant and
They
took-
were-
and took their vote.
They're going to
Well, they
meet,
finalized the warrant before the public hearing,
They-
but then they don't vote to.
but they won't, yeah. They're
uh,
going to meet on April 27th for Boss recommendations after the public hearing.
Yeah. So. So I'll try to get, I'll get in touch with Mr. King this week, try to get back to everybody about that date. All right. Anything else, anybody, the members, anybody wants to bring up? Any public input? Tom,
Motion to adjourn?
motion to adjourn?
7:40, whatever, 4?
4:45. 7:45. Meeting adjourned.